What's going on, everybody? It's your boy Kilo Loco, and today we are going to be going over Jetpack Compose. And this is just going to be like your first introduction to Jetpack Compose in the event that you haven't played with it yet. So I just wanted to show you how to work with it. We're going to be going over layouts. I'm going to show you how to just show a couple of boxes on the screen and get them to appear at different places on the screen. And then after that, we're going to be going over how to implement something like a login form. So I'm going to show you those two concepts today. So let's go ahead and jump right on in. And the very first thing that you'll probably notice is that I'm using Android Studio Canary 12. So at the time of recording, Jetpack Compose is still in alpha, so there are things that may have changed in between the time of recording and the time that you're watching this video. But with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump in. We're going to create a new project. We're going to do an empty compose activity and then just call it whatever you would like. Alright, so once your project finishes loading, the first thing that you're going to want to do is make sure that you have the correct version of Jetpack Compose installed. So head over to your project's build.gradle file, and I'm going to actually be working with Alpha 3, 1.0.0 Alpha 3. So as long as you're on Alpha 3 or further, then you should be able to follow along in this tutorial. But as you saw, it started off as Alpha 2 by default. Now let's go back over to our main activity, and what you might have noticed is that you get this preview area that shows hello Android, and that's actually coming from, and you can actually see that it's called default preview, and you can see that it's coming from this function right here. Now this function has two different attributes. It has the preview attribute, which is essentially what's causing it to run and load the preview right here, and this @composable attribute. So the @composable is essentially specifying that this is going to be using Jetpack Compose in order to create a view. So just keep that in mind, that whenever you're working with Jetpack Compose and you want to create a composable view, then you need to prefix your function with @composable. Now, I'm actually going to change this up a little bit. As you can see, it's outside of the scope of our main activity, and I actually don't like that. I don't like having the functions outside of the main scope of the activity, because then you could essentially be calling greeting from anywhere, and that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So I'm just going to move that right here. Now, when I cut it and I moved it, you might have saw that it turned this red, and that's because obviously the code was no longer there, but it's also showing that this is where the composable functionality is actually being called. So right here, we're just simply calling greeting, and greeting is just like any other function. So as you can see, we're simply just creating these functions, and we're creating these other, implementing these other views, these composable views, and we're able to actually get something to show on screen, which is really cool. So as you can see, once again, we have preview, and we're essentially saying show background, so that's going to show that white background. If I go ahead and refresh this so that it can show the preview. Also, if you do if you save the file, it should reload the preview as well. And the default preview right here, which is what's showing over here, is rendering whatever code is here. So what we see is our greeting function is taking in a name string, and then it's going to render out a text view, which is going to say hello, and then whatever name is passed in, right? So that means that we can say hello from preview, something like that. We can save it. We should be able to see that it updates the preview after it's finished rendering. And as you can see right here, hello from preview. One other thing to notice before we actually start coding some stuff up is that we have our greeting right here, which says Android. So that means that whenever I run the app, we're actually going to see that it says hello Android. So this code is obviously the code that's going to be implemented and called when we run our code on a device or in the emulator. And this code is simply just so that you can preview it. So it doesn't really matter what you put in here. You could do all kinds of logic in here to preview different things. But if it's not going to actually, if you're not implementing that code in your app or in your main activity and it's not being called by the app itself, then none of that's going to actually matter. So just keep that in mind, that the preview doesn't really affect your code all that much. It's just so that you can see it without having to build it to the emulator. All right, so with all of that stuff said and out of the way, let's go ahead and put some boxes on the screen just so that we can see what the layout is like when we're using Jetpack Compose. All right, so as you can see, all I did here was create the box view, which is kind of like a container. So you could think about a box like a container, and a box takes in all these different parameters, and obviously you only have to implement the ones that you're interested in adding. So the parameters that I actually implemented, the arguments that I passed in, were the background color, which I'm making the box blue, and then this modifier. Now, a modifier is a very important concept when it comes to Jetpack Compose, because a modifier is essentially this piece that this object that can be passed around to different composable views, and it does it has like these different modifying methods on it that will change the view that you're modifying. So when we pass this modifier object to our box and we say the size is equal to 200 dp, then we should be expecting to see a 200 dp blue box on our screen. Now, in order for us to try this out and make sure that it's working, let's go ahead and make sure that we're calling box layout in our greeting. Or actually, instead of putting it in our greeting, let's just go ahead and call it right here in this composable for beginners theme. This is just going to be the name of your app, and then suffixed with the word theme, and it's going to be a function that takes in some type of composable views. So I'm just going to go ahead and replace the greeting with my box layout. So let's go ahead and run that and see what that looks like. All right, and there you can see our blue box. Super awesome, right? No, not really. So let's go ahead and do something a little bit more complicated. Now, I want to place two boxes on the screen, right? I want to have my blue box, and I want to have a red box on top of it. So one way that we can do this is we can use a stack. All right, so we have our stack implemented, and as you can see, almost the same exact code that I implemented here, which is just a box, and all I did was I changed the color and I made it slightly smaller, right? Half the size. So let's go ahead and run that. And now we can see that we have our red box and our blue box showing on the screen. So simple enough. A stack, all it does is it stacks things in a Z, like a Z depth type of way. So anything that you put in there first is going to go towards the back, and then the last thing that you put in there is going to be on top. So just like your data structure as a stack, that's how the view works. So if we wanted to change the position of our boxes, which are the children of our stack, then all we need to do is update the alignment. Right now, by default, the alignment is set to start top. So that means that the start is going to be left for English languages. I think in other languages where you read from right to left, then the start would be over here. But we have it from start top, and what we want to do is we want to have the boxes in the center. So let's go ahead and update the alignment now. So we have our alignment center, and let's go ahead and run our app. And as you can see, the alignment is in the center. So we have our blue box and then we have our red box. But the weird thing that's happening right now is that it's all the way up at the top left, and it's not actually changing the position of the boxes themselves. And the reason for that is because our stack is going to be as small as possible by default. And if we want it to be in reference to the entire screen where we have the boxes in the center, then what we need to do is we need to stretch out our stack so that it's the size of our screen. So let's go ahead and add a modifier which will fill up the entire screen, and hopefully we're going to get our result. So as you can see here, all I did was I added in a modifier and I called fill max size on this modifier object, and let's go ahead and run it and see if we get the result that we were expecting. And there you are. We have our boxes in the screen. So it's very important that you understand this concept that our alignment is going to manage any of the children, and it's going to cause the children, which the children here are our two boxes of the stack. and that's going to cause them to be in the center, and also that our views are going to try to take up as little space as possible. And if we want to actually make them fill up the full screen, then we need to do fill max size. So just keep those concepts in mind. Now, once again, we have two boxes, but this box is a child of the stack and this box is a child of the stack, right? So what if we wanted to have a view or a box inside of each of these boxes? Well, let's see what that looks like. All right, so as we can see, we have two child boxes. We have a box inside of our blue box. That's going to be our cyan box. And then we have another magenta box inside of our red box. So let's go ahead and run this, and let's make sure that the DP is correct. But let's go ahead and run this and let's see what we get now. All right, so as you can see, this may be a little bit different behavior than you may have expected, but we have our cyan box and our magenta box at the top left of each of their parents. And the reason for that is because, once again, each child is going to follow the alignment or the gravity of its parent. So the blue box and the red box are following the alignment of their parent, which is the stack, and the stack is specifying that it wants its alignment to be center. But each of these boxes have their own alignment for anything that's inside any of their content or their children, and each of those alignments are going to start off at start top. So that's why we have the cyan and the magenta at the top left. So if we wanted to change the position of the children, then once again we can just go into our box and we can change where the content is going. Now for boxes, they have a different argument to pass in to specify alignment. It's not alignment, but it's actually called gravity. So let's go ahead and add in the gravity. All right, so all I did was I just reformatted the code, and as you can see, our blue box is going to have gravity of top end. That means top right. For like the English language, it would be top right. And then the gravity for our red box for its content is going to be bottom start. So that means the bottom left for the English language. So if we go ahead and run our app one more time, now we can see that the blue box with its top end is causing our cyan box to be at the top right. And then the same thing with our red box, which has the gravity set to bottom start, is showing the cyan or the magenta box at the bottom left. So that's pretty much layouts in a nutshell. That's a pretty core concept to understand here, which is your views are going to be as small as possible. So you may need to do something like fill max size, which is what we had to do for our stack in order to get the layout going correctly. And then boxes and any children of those boxes or those containers are going to be following the gravity or the alignment of their parents. So pretty important concept to understand there in order to start setting up your UI. So let's go ahead and start implementing our login form just so that we can see what it does look like with a real world use case. Oh, and one thing that I want to show you before we do all this is that we could have put our box layout in our preview so that it would start showing over here. So if I just call box layout right here, and then I refresh my preview, we should be able to see our box layout right there in the preview, and we wouldn't necessarily have to run the code directly on our emulator or on our device. We would be able to see it right here, which would allow for faster implementations potentially. So as you can see here, it's a white background because my device is in dark mode, but since we have the surface up here being set to the background color, it's going to default to light mode, and my device is in dark mode, so you saw a black background. But this is essentially the layout of our boxes as we saw before. So let's go ahead and use our preview, but let's go ahead and create a login form instead. All right, so as you can see, I created my login form function, which is once again a composable, or is marked with the @composable attribute. And all I'm doing in here is creating a box, and I'm giving the alignment center and making the modifier fill max size. So once again, we should have a box that's going to fill up the entire size of the screen, and all of its children should be in the center of the screen. Now, I have this this other view which I'm using, which we haven't covered yet, which is called column. Now we have columns and rows, which are very important concepts to understand. We're only going to be going over columns in this one, but rows work exactly in the exact same way. So columns are what they sound like. They're going to be going from top to bottom, and they're going to fill the vertical space. And any child inside of a column is going to be implemented underneath the one before it. So columns go from top to bottom, and then if you were to work with rows, they're going to be going from left to right. So first thing in is going to be on the left. The last thing in is going to be on the right. So let's go ahead and implement some text fields, which are other views that we can implement. And we're going to also implement a button so that we can see two text fields, a username and a password, and then a button to view. All right, so as you can see, we have a text field on top. The value is set to empty, empty string, and then there's a on value change lambda that we have right here, which we're not doing anything in there. Same thing goes for the second line, and then on the last line we have right here, which is a button. It has on click, which is also expecting a lambda to be entered in. Let's go ahead and enter that in right now. And then we have another lambda right here, which it's expecting a child to render out the button. So right now the button doesn't know what it's supposed to look like, so we're actually going to need another view to be implemented into this lambda, which we're actually going to be using a text view so that we can display the word login. So now that we have our login form kind of laid out, let's go ahead and preview it. I'm going to take my login form, and I'm just going to make sure that I'm calling it in a new preview area. All right, so as you can see, I implemented this login form preview, and I put it underneath it. I don't know if order matters in this case. It probably doesn't, but you know, it's better to just have the login form declared before you actually implement it. And as we can see here, we have our login form right here at the very bottom of this screen. If I could just get this to clear out, we can kind of see it. So we have our two text fields, and then we have our button. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that our button is spaced in the middle. And the way that we can do that is we can update the alignment of our column. So I'll pass in a value for horizontal alignment, and I'll specify that I want the alignment to be center horizontally. And then if we go ahead and update that, we can see that our login button is now in the center. Another thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that there's spacing in between each of these views. So one really cool thing about using modifiers, the way that we've been using them, is that it's just another object that can be passed in as a parameter to any of our views. So we could create a single modifier and then pass it in to multiple views, and each of those views can use the modifier. So let me go ahead and add in a modifier that will allow padding from on the top and bottom of each view, essentially showing that there will be space in between each view. So I created an instance of a modifier that has vertical padding, 4DP vertical padding on top and bottom. And as you can see, I'm passing that same modifier into each of the text fields and the button. And when we take a look at the preview, once again, we can see that there is now spacing in between each of those views. So really cool. And if I wanted to add like something like a shadow to a button, we would do that through a modifier. And since we're already passing in a modifier that's being used across multiple views, what we can do is we can essentially append a second modifier to our instance of a modifier. So as you can see, I can do .then and then add on another modifier, which is simply going to draw a shadow on our view. and it will have an elevation of 3 dp. So let's see if we can zoom in and kind of see that shadow. I don't know if you can see it, but it is there. But this is essentially how you would chain together multiple modifiers. All right, so let's go ahead and run this app and let's see what it would be like to interact with our login form. So I'm gonna make sure that I'm calling login form up here where we were originally showing the box layout. Or not up here, right there. Okay, so let's go ahead and call login form right here in our theme, and let's go ahead and run it. And as we can see, we have our login form, and when I pull up the keyboard and I start typing, we notice that nothing's happening. It doesn't matter how much I enter in, it's never going to actually show up anything on the text field. And the reason for that is if we take a look at our text field, in our onValue change, we're actually not updating anything. We're not doing anything or saving or remembering the state of the text field to show an update. We're also showing the value as an empty string, so it's always going to show an empty string no matter what. So let's go ahead and create some state that can be remembered across the different renderings of this composable function, and have it update to show whatever the user has entered in, so that we can essentially use that, display it, and log the user in. So as you can see here, we have two new values. We have a username state and a password state. We're calling the remember function, which is going to allow us to persist data across or not persist data, but essentially keep data in memory and the changes of whatever's inside of this function in memory, because our login form is simply going to be ran several times, and we want to make sure that we're able to keep whatever the value of our text field consistent. We don't want it to be erased every time this function is called. So we're going to remember the mutable state of our text field value. We're going to pass in that value for our top text field to the value, and then on value change, whenever this function is called, we're going to update the state of the value. So we'll be able to actually see the changes whenever a user types them in. And we did the same thing for the password state as well. So as you can see, pretty much the same exact line of code, and we're just using the password state dot value here, and password state dot value is equal to it here. So now when we go over to our app and we start typing, we can actually see that it's persisting or updating that state so that we can actually see those changes on our screen. So just to make our text fields look a little bit more normal, we want to make sure that we have like a placeholder there. So we want to update the placeholder, and then passwords are supposed to have the hidden view. So we don't want to show the password to anybody else that might be looking at the screen around us. So let's just go ahead and add those little things right now. All right, so just a couple of little changes here. We added the placeholder argument, and that takes in a lambda, so I'm just passing in a text. So you can put any composable view in here, but it pretty much only makes sense to put text if you ask me. And then same thing for the placeholder on the password field. We want to add the visual transformation to be a password visual transformation, essentially making it so that the little dots pop up instead of the actual text. And then we also want to use the correct type of keyboard, which is the password keyboard. Let's run it one more time. All right, so I have my app open, and when I enter in my username, which is going to be Kilo, and then when I enter in my password, you can see that we have the little dots to give some security. So that's pretty much how you update the text fields. There's a couple of other things that you could do on it, but those are the most common ones. The very last thing that I want to show you is how to essentially log in. So whenever a user hits the button, whenever they tap on that button, we want to log in the user. So we're going to essentially be using this username state and this password state and the values that are provided there. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to print it out. I'm just going to log it. Normally what you would do is you would create a whole entire login function. We're not going to cover all that stuff today. I just want to keep it simple, but I want to show you how to access those values. All right, so as you can see in the onClick Lambda, we're just extracting the string value of the username state and the password state by calling .value.text. And then I'm just going to simply log it right here. So we have the username and the password. So let me go ahead and update my username and password. And when I hit log in, we should be able to see it in our logs. And there it is. So we were able to successfully access the username and the password by clicking our button. So that's pretty much it. I know that was kind of a long video just to go over some of the basic concepts, but I really believe that going over the layout and showing how gravity and alignment works was very important. It was one of the things that I struggled with most when getting started with Jetpack Compose. And then I also wanted to show you what it would be like to interact with things like the text fields, making sure that you're able to remember small amounts of state across the different rendering of your functions, and then also cover a little bit about the preview, how we're able to actually see, you know, our default preview, which we implemented our box layout, and then also create another preview using the login form preview. So that's going to be it for today. I hope you learned something. If you liked the video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more videos like this, feel free to subscribe. So that's all I have to say. No more. Let's cut this video off right here. Make sure you go out there and you keep coding passionately. Later.